Well, first, thank you all for coming, and I want to particularly thank three colleagues who, over the years, have helped me in many, many ways. One of them is right here, Bill Zacks. Another one is back there, Ian Brown, and another is not here, and that's Warren McDougall. And a fourth I now have to add. In the last few years, Robert has been particularly helpful. I also have to warn you, I rewrote this paper 2 days ago because I completely changed my mind about it. And part of it has to do with a thing called press figures. Now, if you have never heard of that, cover your ears, because it's the circle of hell Dante never explored. It's sort of like, if you wonder what the witches were like in Tam O'Shanter in real life, they were press figures. That's all I will tell you. I will warn you when that page comes up, and I will warn you, I have no idea what they are or whether I'm applying them correctly or not. 250 years and some 72 hours have passed since the first number of the Encyclopedia Britannica was issued from premises only a few hundred meters from where we are gathered, just up the street and around the corner, in Stairs Close off the Lawn Market. It was a Saturday, the 10th of December, and probably late in the day, perhaps the very hour that we ourselves convened. That same day, the Royal Academy was founded in London. James Cook was several months into his first voyage of discovery. And the Liberty Song was making the rounds in Boston, where the British Army's 29th Regiment of Foot had recently arrived, the pieces now in place for the Boston Massacre. Although the almanacs all agreed that the stars were fortuitously aligned, none could have predicted that those first 24 pages of the Britannica in their protective blue paper wrapper would eventually achieve a celebrity beyond Reynolds's Academy, travel to locales more remote than any Cook would visit, and bring about their own democratic revolution. Andrew Bell, Colin McFarquhar, and William Smellie, the three behind the first Scottish encyclopedia, were relative neophytes. And here's an image of two of them. Bell is the, where's my little pointer? There it is, the handsome gentleman there, and Smellie here. I do not know of, nor does the Dictionary of National Biography, an image of Colin McFarquhar. If there is one, I'd be delighted to find out about it. I think I can guess why not. This man was an extraordinary practical joker, and, as you would have to be. And Smellie was just nasty, an insult comedian by all accounts. So if you were partnered with an insult comedian and a practical joker, you would make sure there was no image of you anywhere. And you would be a very good businessman, which is what we're going to discover tonight. Bell, the eldest, had been Richard Cooper's apprentice and began his career as a print engraver with the Scots Magazine in 1761. Before that, he had done mostly jewelry engraving. McFarquhar, the youngest, had only completed a printing apprenticeship in 1765 with John Reed, then Alexander Donaldson's partner, where he would have observed the best and the worst practices of the trade. Smellie also apprenticed as a printer under Patrick Neal, who granted him 3 hours a day to attend university lectures in medicine, law, natural history, and classics. Although each had learned the trade from the best in their fields, the highly competitive, financially complex realm of international encyclopedia making was surely a grasp beyond their reach. After all, their established competition, the venerable London-based Chambers Cyclopedia, would publish its 10th edition in 1768, and Diderot's Encyclopaedia was in its 16th year. The Britannica had some distance to go to catch up. And just for fun, that's the title page of the first, which would not have been issued in 1768. It would have been issued when the set was complete, as the date indicates at the bottom. My narrative tonight is a sort of triptych, before, during, and after altarpiece celebrating the first Britannica. The first panel contemplates the mysteries surrounding the Britannica's origins, who conceived the project and how was it developed. The second panel portrays the execution of the press run itself, what happened between the issue of the first number in December 1768 and the completion of the 3-volume set in July 1771. And the third panel of the triptych reflects on the enigma of the Britannica's afterlife, its curious resurrection in London in 1773 and in 1775 in 3, perhaps even 4 separate reissues. First panel, the conception. In late May 1767, an advertisement appeared in Edinburgh's 4 newspapers announcing the publication, given gratis, stitched in blue covers, of proposals for printing by subscription a new and complete dictionary of arts and sciences, illustrated with above 300 copper plates exhibiting several thousand figures accurately engraven. And this is the ad as appeared in the newspaper. It's the only surviving proof that as early as 1767 they were attempting to find a market for the encyclopedia. The proposal itself is no longer extant. But, the proposals were available at shops of Andrew Bell, Colin McFarquhar, and John Belfer, recently partnered with William Smellie, and arguably at the time Edinburgh's leading bookseller. This is the first mention of the Encyclopaedia Britannica in print, although it was yet to be given that title. It suggests that by May 1767, the proprietors were ready to test the market for subscribers, and it provides a rudimentary sense of the work at its earliest. There is no indication of format, and the proposal itself has not survived. But how long had the idea been germinating, and with whom? Let's consider Smellie as the source of the inspiration. He edited the Scots Magazine from 1760 to 1765, where he emphasized medicine and natural history and significantly increased the number of engravings. Under his editorship, Andrew Bell became the sole engraver for the magazine, often contributing as many as 6 engravings an issue, and thus surpassing the total in the Gentleman's Magazine. In January 1764, Smellie printed William Owens's introduction to his new and complete dictionary, together with a folio-sized foldout of Owens's Tree of Knowledge, engraved by Bell as front matter to be bound in with the 1763 volume of the Scots Magazine. And that would have been a costly decision. Here it is there. I don't know how clear it is to you, but you can simply see the extraordinary size of it, the number of folds to fit it into the Scots Magazine. And it's a curious thing to have done. It is not an advert for Owens in any way. Smellie also wrote an editorial preface to this piece, describing the Scots Magazine as being like an encyclopedia, a storehouse for knowledge, indexed and illustrated, and here's his quote, with utility being the principal intention. Here Smellie directly connects his literary work compiling a magazine with that of Owens as an encyclopedist. And as we have seen, the first proposal for the Britannica in 1767 would appropriate Owens's title. Smellie was considering encyclopedia making and had a model in Owens, but was he the originator of the project? The next reference to the Britannica appears in a series of advertisements between the 13th and the 20th of February of 1768, and again in mid-March. These comprised the full proposal, itself dated the 1st of February, but one that differed fundamentally from the proposal offered gratis in May of 1767. The title had changed, and subscriptions were being taken in now for a work titled the Encyclopaedia Britannica, and that's the first time that title appears. The format is octavo, the same as that of the Scots Magazine and Owens's dictionary. Subscribers are offered a comprehensive treatment of natural history, following the system of Linnaeus, and with a commentary that renders that author's system easy and intelligible. This sounds like William Smellie, who won a university prize for plant taxonomy. But the defining feature of the proposal, and the real sea change since 1767, is the declaration of its explicit Scottishness. Its authors are described as a society of gentlemen in Scotland, and Scottish subject matter is promised. And here's a quotation from the proposal. Under the word law, the principles of the law of Scotland will be exhibited, and its terminology explained, rendering this work more useful to our countrymen than any dictionary hitherto published. The proposal ends with this patriotic plea. As the present work is to be composed by a society of Scots gentlemen, it is hoped that this circumstance will at least create a desire that it may succeed. This desire will be increased when it is considered that this is the first attempt of its kind in Scotland, and when it is likewise further considered that a great sum is annually transmitted to a neighboring nation for books of this nature, even though laboring under all the defects which a bad plan and worse execution naturally produce. This patriotism is consistent with Smellie's professional profile. He had worked with Hamilton, Balfour, and Neil when they published their Edinburgh Chronicle, a newspaper committed to Scottish culture, including Edinburgh's first theatre reviews. He edited the Scots magazine, another proudly Scottish publication. And having later declined to edit the second Britannica, he joined Gilbert Stuart in the Edinburgh Magazine and Review, conspicuously attentive to Scots publications and unbridled in practicing the aggressive exegeses that John Wesley identified as the distinguishing trait of Scots. When Wesley was in Edinburgh, he constantly wrote back complaining that he couldn't preach without a Scots Presbyterian shouting out a contradiction at him. He said this was nothing he had ever heard, anywhere else, including in the Americas. And it's true to this day. So just shout whenever you get fed up. I'll feel at home. If you don't, you'll just make me feel very English. But where are we here? I've lost my place. But nonetheless, like much of Edinburgh's intelligentsia and its book trade, Smellie always asserted his Scottishness without decrying the Union. And that's an important point. That's why it's the Encyclopedia Britannica. His last foray into journalism in 1788 would be the Scottish Chronicle, which he intended to launch on the 100th anniversary of the Glorious Revolution. But early events in France scared off his backers. The encyclopedia's promotion of Scots culture was never a denial of the concept of Britain, neither politically nor commercially. There was no Jacobitism in Smellie, his partners, or the encyclopedia. If Britannia were ruling the waves, then Scotland had the peace and the opportunity to prosper. It was a good deal worth confirming in the encyclopedia's title. In view of yesterday's vote and Brexit, it's worth contemplating that observation. And this was especially important, this assertion of Scottishness within Britain, when the current and uncompromising bigotry of John Wilkes insisted, in print and in Parliament, that Scots were not capable of integrating into English culture. A complicated political position is packed into the title Encyclopedia Britannica, as it was into Smellie's life as a journalist. Now, a simpler explanation for playing the Scottish card was English competition. In 1768, Henry Croker's recently finished and London-published Dictionary of Arts and Sciences was extensively advertised in Edinburgh newspapers and competed directly with the first Britannica throughout its run. With contributors from the London Society for the Encouragement of the Arts and a royal patent, Croker's dictionary was a prime instance of what the Britannica, a proposal called books transmitted from a neighboring nation. The list of booksellers taking in subscriptions is much expanded now in this second proposal. Balfour is joined by more than a dozen firms in Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Dundee, and Perth, as well as shops in Newcastle and York, but none in London, where Croker and William Owens held the market. There is no evidence of the Britannica in London before 1773. The advertisement also apologizes for delays, admitting that subscribers had been given reason to expect that the first number would have been published by now. The cause is put down to the impracticability of the initial plan, with a commitment that the first number will be ready to deliver on or before the 1st of May next. May came and went without a word about the Britannica. No first number, no advertisement. Then, on and around the 29th of June, Edinburgh's newspapers announced this day is published and given away gratis proposals for printing by subscription a work entitled Encyclopedia Britannica. This is the third proposal now in a year. Three subscription proposals for the Britannica had now appeared, in fact, in 14 months. And here's this is the only extant. The other second proposal is in newspapers, but it doesn't exist as a freestanding copy. The list of booksellers, the advertisement also apologizes for these delays. This third proposal is dated 9th of June, and the encyclopedia is now dedicated by permission to Sir Lawrence Dundas of Kerse, Baronet, Member of Parliament for the City of Edinburgh. A response perhaps to Croker's royal license, but not the best choice. Sir Lawrence was steadily surrendering his authority in Scotland to his distant cousin Henry Dundas, and the baronet's name would not feature on the title page when the encyclopedia finally appeared. The Britannica was now a quarto because the octavo would require 10 volumes, an inconvenient number, the proposal says, and the larger page would allow more detailed engraving. Andrew Bell was likely responsible for forcing this change. He had found the format of the Scots magazine inadequate when copying medical and technical engravings from folio and quarto originals. His displeasure led him to compel Smellie to include an editorial apology in the Scots magazine in 1764 for the limitations of octavo engravings. The Britannica would be the first quarto encyclopedia in Europe, and the first work of its kind in English to employ the term encyclopedia. The advert goes on to observe that this alteration, both upon account of the delay it will occasion and the expense of engraving anew all the copper plates, which were done for the former size, will be very prejudicial to the editors. The proposed 300 octavo engravings have now become 150 in the quarto, but even this will eventually change. It'll become 160 by the time they're done. So Edinburgh waited for the first encyclopedia produced by native sons, for native sons and daughters. But silence surrounded the Britannica until the 7th of December, 1768, when a front page ad in all 4 newspapers promised the publication of the first 24-page part in 3 days' time, with subscribers urged to confirm their subscriptions and send to collect their copies from McFarquhar's shop in Stairs Close. The deadline was met this time, and on the 10th of December, the first number sold for 8p fine paper and 6p second paper. Number 2 appeared on schedule 2 weeks later on the 24th of December. Second panel on the altar, an apologia. By June of 1769, the proprietors could announce with some relief that 15 24-page parts were with subscribers. But another problem was becoming increasingly evident. Smellie was 380 pages into the encyclopedia and had yet to reach the article arithmetic. It took him 25 years to finally write the book his whole life was designed around. And he got a huge sum of money for it, but was in such legal trouble that he died before anybody got their hands on it. I mean, the tragedy of his life is comic to a degree that, needs to be celebrated in biography, which I always promise myself I'll do, but then I fall asleep. But it seemed unlikely, actually impossible, that the Britannica could be completed in 3 quarto volumes. A glance at the complete first edition conveys the difficulty, and I have to thank Bill Sachs for this. Here's the spine, so you can see Volume 1, A to B, and Volume 2, to C to L, Volume 3, M to Z. You can see his quill wearing out as he goes along. Now, he was just cantankerous beyond belief. He ended up in law courts with every partner he had, except John Balfour, who was too sick to sue him. So it was always things like this: my will or no way. It was, John Murray once said, one of his partnerships with William Creech, he said, this would surely end up in Doctors' Commons. And it really was. Smellie just made bad marriages over and over again because he was a bad partner himself. So there we stand. Subscribers had complained about this, and Smellie published an apologia on the 8th and 15th of July, 1769, confessing that the proprietors originally, and this is word for word, that he said, originally we had no idea how or even if our plan would work. He said, in former advertisements, it was difficult to convey such a complex undertaking before any part of it was published. And he essentially said, until I started writing this, I had no idea at all. So don't blame me, to find someone else to blame. The unpredictable component, the problem was this innovative notion of treatises. Some were near book length. exceeding anything in the London encyclopedias. Anatomy was 165 double-column pages. So you can see the problem with volume AB. But filling more than 6 issues from number 7 through number 13. Croker's Anatomy, by contrast, was 1.5 folio pages. Smellie took umbrage with subscribers who assumed that the Britannica would, this is his quotation, he said, "You people thought this would not be an original work, but only a bookseller's job, a servile imitation of other dictionaries." No surprise, Smellie remarks. "I'm not surprised at that," he said to his readers. He said, "considering the general quackery of the age with regard to publications." He just insults them. Denying the validity of the complaints, he said, "No grounds for your complaints." He finishes by thanking those who have communicated manuscripts, and this is interesting, or submitted unsolicited material. The usual practice with magazines, but not with encyclopedias. He was asking for people to send things in. But Smellie goes on to encourage what he describes this as an opportunity for communicating observations which perhaps would not bear a separate publication. This should give some pause. Who were these contributors? Were they recruited by Smellie as the heavy lifting called for in making an encyclopedia became more apparent to him? Smellie no doubt discussed his work with friends such as Gilbert Stuart, who is the likely author of the Treatise on Scots Law. And if Stuart, who was fast becoming Smellie's closest friend, was assisting him, he might not have wanted his identity revealed. Stuart was keen to get a university sinecure, and the university did not look kindly on the First Britannica, which Principal Robertson summarily dismissed and the medical faculty contested. As we have heard, Smellie and Stuart co-edited the Edinburgh Magazine and Review. Its list of contributors, identified by John Murray and including Thomas Blacklock, may well reflect the Britannicas, which were never disclosed. And I think Blacklock would have been one of those anonymous contributors. At any rate, after this June press release, the apology, the publication schedule for the Britannica actually ran smoothly. Smellie had now completed his work on William Buchan's Domestic Medicine, which was published in June 1769, freeing him to attend more closely to the Britannica. Buchan's medical bestseller simultaneously with compiling the encyclopedia for at least 6 months. Smellie, however, continued editing and printing his newspaper, the Weekly News, while finishing the Britannica, so he considerably divided attentions throughout. Volume 1 would suffer other indignities, and this next is great. 12 pages from the Treatise on Bookkeeping, again, that notorious first volume, were left out of number 25, and it was published before the errors were caught. No one noticed. The 10 missing pages were issued separately, paginated with asterisks and the uppercase letters A through F. The errata to Volume 1, printed on the verso of the last page of number 29, notes, "Bookkeeping was by accident omitted in the printing, but will be printed and given in proper time." It wasn't even ready yet, with directions for inserting, so that this, all in italics, and the preceding article on the book may be expunged from this list when the book is bound. A mea culpa followed. It is humbly hoped that the above faults, with others which may have escaped notice, or are here omitted as trivial, will be candidly deemed venial in a work so complex, so various, and so extensive as the present. Now, if Bell had misjudged, or at least capitulated against his better instincts in attempting octavo engravings, and Smellie was not fully prepared for the task of editing the Britannica, was MacFarquhar the one keeping the venture upright and overseeing the printing? Colin MacFarquhar's early career is remarkable for what it says about his entrepreneurship. As his apprenticeship with Reed was ending, he was already negotiating as Donaldson's printing partner for the Universal Bible. First advertised solely in MacFarquhar's name on the 14th of January, 1765, in the Edinburgh and Newcastle newspapers. It was a folio issued in parts over a period of more than 2 years, with a first impression of 3,700 copies. A figure confirmed in 2 different sources. One is Patrick Neal's surviving ledgers, which show him billing MacFarquhar in July 1766 for printing in June of the previous year 3,700 copies of 8 sheets of the Bible. The other is the session papers for the 4th of February, 1766, in a case brought against Reed by his former partner, Alexander Donaldson, and several creditors. MacFarquhar gives key evidence about the printing of the Universal Bible, describing how he had employed Reed, only recently his master, to print the Bible for him in fortnightly numbers, and Reed was to print the entire thing. 6 sheets each number, with 3,700 copies for the first impression, and to reprint 750 copies of the first 6 parts. All the details for the accounting are in the session papers, with the interesting observation that MacFarquhar had negotiated a 10% discount from Reed, whose financial situation was then rather desperate. Reed fled Edinburgh after printing 24 numbers to escape his creditors, with the rest of the Bible being put out to piecework, as Patrick Neal recorded. MacFarquhar's share of the profits from the Bible were sufficient for him to lease a warehouse in the Lawn Market 6 months before establishing his own printing business in Stairs Close. With his shop operating in 1767, MacFarquhar immediately advertises another significant religious publication, Matthew Henry's Exposition of the Old and New Testament, issued in 114 parts of 7 sheets each, and in 4 choices of paper, ranging in price from £1, 1 shilling, 5 pence for the 4th paper to £3, 6 shillings for finest paper. Sir Walter Scott's father owned a handsomely bound copy. This same year, 1767, saw the first tentative advertisement for the Britannica, and when the 3rd proposal had resolved the challenges of the encyclopedia's format in mid-1768, MacFarquhar was well into the schedule for Henry's Exposition, and ready for the Britannica to be his 3rd subscription publication in 3 years. But where was the Britannica printed? MacFarquhar now had his own premises, but no accounts for the first Britannica survive to help identify the printer. Here they come. Press figures may indicate that it was run off in one shop. They may not, depending on who I've talked to. The figures, at least, are the same for each gathering, all with the number 3, and that's in volume 1, including the misplaced treatise on bookkeeping. So there's just one press figure running through the whole of that. One difference is apparent. Of the 8 copies of the first Britannica that I have examined, 3 have a dagger in their press figures, consistently placed throughout the volume. This seems to indicate first paper. Second paper has no dagger. An asterisk serves the same function in the Universal Bible. The 2nd and 3rd volumes use the dagger with the same consistency, but the press numbering here differs from the first volume. 3 numbers appear, 1, 2, and 3, with occasional gatherings lacking a figure altogether, only occasionally though. And 3 appears in about 80% of the gatherings in the next 2 volumes. And just so you'll know, that's the demon there. That just tells you what the gathering is the 10th time they've used the letter E. And if it were fine paper, there would be an asterisk right there, almost underneath that N. And with Bill Zach's help, we looked at the positioning of a few and whether it's a London or not. There's no real variation. And I've looked at 8 now, and the press figures are all in the same locations. So that's the little beast. The press figures 1 and 2 never appear on more than a few before 3 returns, and there is no variation in any surviving copies that I've collated so far. The press figures in Henry's Exposition also use the numbers 1, 2, and 3, as well as daggers in what appears to be a similar indication of finest paper. And the Exposition's serial publication overlaps that of the Britannica. They seem to be printed at relatively the same time. The paper for both the Exposition and the Encyclopedia also have similar watermarks. Were both the work of the same printing firm? I don't know. One thing is certain, though. By 1770, MacFarquhar's business as a printer was thriving, and in October that year, he advertises for 2 additional compositor printers. Does this indicate that he was printing all or part of the Britannica on his own premises by that point? When he employed Reed to print the Universal Bible in 1765, MacFarquhar had no shop. That had changed. He had a growing business. Still, the answer remains moot for now. After the July 1769 apologia, advertisements dwindled for the Britannica, Perhaps subscriptions were improving, and Smellie may have been getting assistance with writing the original articles, his covert plea for submissions in July paying off. When ads do appear, they highlight new treatises, as on the 14th of October of 1769, an ad for numbers 27 and 28 emphasized its 27-page article on botany, disputing Linnaeus on the sexuality of plants. That obsession of Smellie's had been a prime selling point in the proposals of 1767 and 1768, which suggests that Smellie may have been involved to begin with. He had a very bizarre opposition to Linnaeus that caused him lots of embarrassment later, and no one else agreed with him. So if that's in the 1767 proposal, he must have been involved from at least that point. Publishing two numbers simultaneously also happens occasionally during the Britannica run. Advertisements addressing these anomalies appear at regular intervals, and the public is reminded also every 6 weeks or so that subscriptions are still possible, parts are still available. Overall, the first Britannica was inefficiently advertised, especially when compared with the effort put into the second and the third editions by Charles Eliot, who shared John Murray's belief that a book's success was proportional to the size of its advertising budget. Or, as Murray remarked derisively when Thomas Ewing, the Dublin bookseller, balked at the cost of promoting a title, 2 guineas advertising will hardly move such a book unless it can blaze itself like a comet. One wonders, did the first Britannica blaze like a comet? Panel 3 on the altar, the resurrection. This matter of advertising leads directly into questions about the distribution of the first Britannica. As we have already remarked, there is no evidence of any attempt to engage with the London market between 1768 and 1771. The only source for the size of the print run is Constable, who gives 2 figures, 3,500 and 3,000. While a typical run would have been 500, some subscriptions were very different. Domestic Medicine, an octavo whose subscription list survives, had a first impression of 3,000. And as we see and have heard, Reed printed 3,700 Universal Bibles in parts, with a second impression of 750 for the first 6 numbers, all in folio. The Bible was a success, as the session papers confirm, so there is good reason to assume that Parker, with his warehouse ready, may well have followed suit with the Britannica. If the run was 3,000, did it sell out? As we shall soon see, the answer to that is no. And did purchasers subscribe to the parts, or did most wait to acquire the full set? The irregularities during the Britannica's early months might well have scared off subscribers who feared the project would not fulfill its promises. The Advocate's accession book indicates that their first edition was acquired as a set in 1771, and the inscription on the Fullerton copy in the National Library of Scotland suggests the same thing. No single parts and wrappers appear to have survived, but ESTC lists 44 complete sets in institutional libraries. That is a considerable figure in some respects. Only 8 copies of the Universal Bible survive. Yet session papers confirm a first impression of 3,700, with a further 750 of the first 6 numbers. ESTC also records 65 copies of Croker's Dictionary, including 1 in the House of Lords Library, so 44 surviving first Britannica seems pretty decent by comparison. The encyclopedia was completed on the 13th of July, 1771, with the publication of its 100th part, which included a preface, title pages for the 3 volumes, and 10 additional engravings, bringing the total to 160, rather than the 150 advertised in the third proposal. Instructions to the binder for the placement of the unpaginated engravings in each volume were included, as were modest corrigenda and notanda. The directions cautioned the binder not to pare too much off the margin, as it was necessary in several places, particularly in bookkeeping, to enlarge, that just stays a problem all the way through, it was necessary to enlarge the page beyond the measure of the rest of the book, finally addressing Encyclopedia's most visible scar, that bookkeeping article. The complete cost was £3 7 shillings for the best paper and £2 1 shilling for a second best paper. But as we shall see, a fair number of unsold sheets must have remained in McFarquhar's warehouse until at least 1775. Advertisements for the complete set appeared in Edinburgh newspapers from July through to Christmas of 1771. In May 1772, MacFarquhar begins to re-advertise sets of the Britannica alongside advertisements for a second edition in parts of Henry's Exposition of the Bible. Coincidentally, one such ad alongside one for William Old on November 23rd of that year announces the dissolution of Old's partnership with Smellie, who would set up his own printing premises 2 weeks later in Anchor Close. Anecdotal evidence claims that Smellie declined to participate in a second edition of the Britannica because he disagreed with Bell and MacFarquhar's intention to include biographies. This is a dubious explanation. Smellie wrote several biographies, including one of Henry Hume, Lord Kames, for the Third Britannica. There is no surviving correspondence to explain Smellie's withdrawal. Perhaps the irregularities with the first edition moved Bell and MacFarquhar to exclude him. But this would be odd, considering they subsequently turned to James Tytler, the balloonist and polymath, as their second editor, an infamously unreliable bankrupt and drunk who had to be hounded for copy and whom MacFarquhar kept under lock and key in his own home when he could find him. Smellie was a scholastic monk by comparison. It is more likely that Smellie withdrew from the venture on his own accord, taking his cut to underwrite his printing business, which he opened immediately. Freed from editing that second edition, he could also focus on his own writing, which eventually brought him 1,000 guineas from Charles Eliot for the first volume of his Philosophy of Natural History. And as the First Britannica came to its end in 1771, Smellie and Gilbert Stuart were no doubt already tossing about ideas for what would soon become the Edinburgh Magazine and Review, which they launched in 1773 with Andrew Bell providing the engravings. The First Britannica caused only modest stirs in Edinburgh. Boswell refers to it fleetingly. Dr. William Cullen decried the article on ether, and William Robertson dismissed it as hackwork. The academic establishment were unnerved by this uncredentialed upstart, just as later generation of academics would be by Wikipedia. The only indication that, despite its failings, the first edition had market potential came from London, where at least 3 and perhaps even 4 attempts were made to sell the First Britannica under London imprints. In each case, unsold sheets were purchased from Bell and MacFarquhar and repackaged, twice in 1773 by separate firms, Edward and Charles Dilly and John Donaldson, the brother of Alexander, and once again in 1775, again by John Donaldson. All 3 used the same new preface, written expressly for the London market, perhaps by MacFarquhar, who would help to compile the second and third editions if, when Smellie jumped ship in 1771, there had been no prospect of a London and a market. It differs from the Edinburgh preface in being longer and placing more emphasis on the use of treatises, while directly criticizing the English encyclopedias and calling out Chambers's popular encyclopedia by name. The second preface thus directly engages that London market, largely ignored by the first. Other than the new preface and new title pages, the London Britannica is the same as the Edinburgh. No differences in press figures. These were definitely unsold sheets. The London sales, whatever their extent, did result in the first edition's only reviews in the Gentleman's Magazine and the Monthly Review, both in 1774. Where the Britannica was chastised by the former for its explicit engravings in the midwifery treatise, and eviscerated by the latter for its organizational principles. They are not good reviews. There is no way to determine how well these retreads sold. Surviving copies of Donaldson's imprint are extremely rare, with 1 from 1773 and 2 from 1775. That are accounted. There may be 1 other not on the list, but equal to the total for MacFarquhar's Universal Bible, with its first edition of over 3,700 copies. So I think that's interesting that 8 Dillies are still out there. Whatever the reviewers thought, those who purchased the first London Britannica appear to have valued it, or at least as much as MacFarquhar's Bible. The principal cheerleader for the first Britannica may have issued a 4th London version And his was the most thoroughly contemporary accounts of the encyclopedia. John Murray saw both the cultural and the commercial value of the Britannica. He wrote to the Dublin bookseller Thomas Ewing on the 12th of June, 1772, just short of a year after the completion of the Britannica and a year before the first London reissues, urging Ewing to consider taking a few copies. Murray's letter reads like a review, and it demonstrates enough knowledge of the encyclopedia to suggest that he had examined it closely, as he comments in some detail on several treatises, pointing out which are original. And unlike the English reviewers and those who had complained in Edinburgh, Murray is a fan of the methodology. And here just quickly, that's the 1773 edition of the Donaldson. And this is Murray's letter, and you can just see the detail he goes into about the article on ether. And he seems to disagree with Colin about that. Botany, he loves all these articles. So there's nothing anywhere on natural history to compare. Grammar's brilliant, anatomy. Right? He's really doing a selling job, and he has read them. They're real concrete references. He's read those 3 volumes and sees profitability in it. Murray writes again to Ewing a fortnight later, urging him to act quickly and offering a retail wholesale price analysis. In the shops, he says, the price remains £3 6 shillings for fine paper and £2 1 shilling for second paper. And to the trade, it is still £2 1 shilling 2pence or £2 for second paper. He says, however, if you take a number of these, Murray says he can get an offer for Ewing of £2 7 shillings 6pence for fine paper and £1 16 shillings for second. So he feels he can negotiate with Bell and MacFarquhar. Nothing in Murray's correspondence, however, suggests that Ewing accepted. I've got 2 conclusions here. I'm going to read the shorter one, which is only a paragraph, and we can get to some questions that way. Unless you're keen to listen to my voice for another 5 minutes. More than a year later, on the 2nd of November of 1773, after the appearance of the Dilly and Donaldson Britannicas in London, Murray writes to Andrew Bell, sending him an edition of the Universal History, an exceeding fine one, he writes, scarce and valuable, and the history of Clarissa Harlowe. And Bill thinks, he wonders if it might not be Murray's own edition. And he says of it, it's the best edition of Clarissa you'll find anywhere. He said, the best of that book. And then he asserts, you will have reason to be pleased with both of these, as they will show to advantage in your library. In return, Murray asks Bell for an amount you will be sure to send me as fast as possible in your Dictionary of Arts. He wants to do a trade for unsold sheets. Murray then gives the value of the Universal History as £5 5 shillings, and the Clarissa as £1 1 shilling, making a total of £6 6 shillings, or 3 or 4 Britannicas, depending upon the paper quality and the discount Bell was willing to give to a friend and fellow Scot in the trade. What became of those encyclopedias? Perhaps the foundation for another London issue under Murray's imprint, or gifts to valued customers, or exchanges for other books. Murray's respect for the first Britannica must have been shared, at least in Edinburgh, on the 27th of November 1773, at his Parliament Square premises, the bookseller William Gordon auctioned a specialist private law library. Although anonymous, the collection is very impressive, with all the text one would expect in an advocate's library at the time. And among them, prominently advertised, the first Britannica, no doubt valued for its original article on Scots law. And I'll stop there. Okay.